Alright, so here we're starting the tails, and you can see I have a wooden piece that's been sanded, 1/32 sheet. And there I've got my outside rudders all ready to go. And you have to put these on in such a way as to I line up the leading edge on the vertical piece, because that's where it's going to go to the end of the fuselage. And then the other parts, there's a little bit of paper all the way around it. You can see that the wooden piece is considerably smaller. So there's the piece that is set up so that it's right up against the leading edge. But then the outside, you can see that there's that extra paper. And what that's going to do, essentially, is let you sort of fold things around. You don't really fold them over like I'm motioning, but it just means when you put your glue on, you can get things nice and tight. And get a nice shaped rudder and fin in this case. So put some glue on the other side of the paper, and then you just got to pop it on carefully. This was cut very precisely, very nicely. The model, again, so far, everything seems to be pretty nice, although we'll find out later I had some issues putting on the stabilizers. But anyway, make sure that the edges are all crimped and look good, and you should be ready to go. And there you have your full flying comma rudder, and it looks very nice. It just needs some control horns at the base of it, but everything looks good, looks smooth, and it's going to fit right like that. And just glue it directly there. Super easy to do. Now, this is where I ran into trouble. So this is the pattern for the tail. You see that piece there is cut out for a piece of wire, and I began to follow the directions on the model, which means you're supposed to put that piece onto a piece of balsa, but I just used the balsa because it was already 1 millimeter. Now I'm trying to figure out in this case, what piece of wire am I supposed to use? And I couldn't figure out which piece of wire I was supposed to use. I don't know. None of them seemed to fit. But what I did do was cut out these two forms, and all I did here was trace this and cut it out, and then and I cut it out in two sections so I could get two pieces cut at the same time, and they would be the same size, and this worked out just fine. And again, this way I didn't end up gluing that piece onto a piece of wood like I did previously. Same with the rudder. I just used it as a pattern because the balsa itself was as thick as it's supposed to be, so I just figured why glue that to the balsa. There I'm cutting and making sure that I have that slot cut the right way. We're going to see later that I ended up giving up on that idea. But here I get these so that they're about overlapping, and then I just start cutting. And then I end up with two elevators and stabilizers that are accurate, the same, and ready to go for starting to work on them. And then you, in this case, I'm cutting out the slot for the wire, which again ultimately I ended up not using, and I'll show you why. But I'm cutting out the slot for the wire and making sure that's all perfect. Then I rounded the edges, flattened the edges, made them kind of airfoil shaped so that they will go and be hidden underneath the paper and look good when you put the paper over top. And now you got to place this sucker into the paper, and that's kind of difficult because it ends up you got to figure out where that slot's gonna go for that wire. But anyway, start cutting out the skins, and so there's parts that are flat that you're able to do, and then there's other parts that aren't. And you just start cutting this thing out just like we always have. No big deal. And then cut the corners. Go ahead and color the edges to get rid of all of the white, which makes sense. Then I drew a little line, a little tick mark where the leading edge is, and then the other end is where that curve is cut. And I drew a line down there just so I know that's supposedly like the leading edge, so that I have a visual mark, a visual reference when I'm putting in my little wooden interior. Don't know if that's necessary, but for me it makes me feel better that I've got that reference point. So put this piece in. Now here's where I made my first mistake. I added this, again, the edge is butted up against it, but I didn't know where I should put it in terms of in the actual skin. So I know I wanted outline all the way around. I just made it even. But it turns out my slots did not line up with the holes in the side of the fuselage, and we'll show you what happened. What I should have done is taken the piece of the skins, put them up against the fuselage where the hole was for that wire, and then make a line, and then I could put it exactly where it's supposed to be. But I didn't do that, as we'll see. Anyway, fold this over, make sure it looks okay, and don't crimp anything. I colored the inside with this dark brownish color in case there was overlap problems. Put a little glue on the paper, just as usual. All this paper modeling stuff gets to be repetitious, and once you've done a few, you can sort of, read ahead and figure out what you're going to have to do. But it's all enjoyable. Again, make sure the edges are down. You don't want to have any of that wood showing through. But once you get it, that's where it's going to fit, but it's supposed to fit where that little dot is where that piece of wire is supposed to go. But that's where it's going to end up. And it'll be a really nice tail, hopefully. And then there's the rudder ready to go. Looks good. But then this is where things kind of went awry. So when I looked at this, notice there's a slot that I actually thought was going to be slotted for the elevator, so I cut that. So it's actually cut out a little bit. But it turns out the only place I'm supposed to do is that little dot right there. It says W, and that's where a wire is supposed to go through. So I didn't do that right. So I found a wire, got it to the right size based on just measuring, and stick it through there. And what you find out is, this is not the problem with the kit at all, but if you're the slightest bit off, nothing is going to line up. In other words, when you try to put this thing on, it's supposed to come in like this, and then when you put the piece of paper on, it's supposed to line up around the outside edge. That's all fine and dandy, and it's supposed to give you support. Remember that the fuselage sides in this thing are just paper. There's no wood on them. So anyway, I ran into some trouble. I did droop the... I'm trying to show you. I'm drooping the little elevators. And so in order to do that, I just cut through and drop them, sand them a little bit so that they'll fit right. But I just go ahead and just score it on either side, and it cuts really easily. The wood in there gives it a nice backing, a nice easy way to cut. And get that all set up really nice. And I was trying to just get them so they were scored and I could just bend them down, but as it ended up, they ended up snapping anyway, which was fine. So I just pulled them off and then take this guy and sand it on a sanding block to give it an angle. So they'll have a nice, don't know if that's necessary, but that way I'll have a nice area to glue. Color the edges so that you don't see the white or the balsa on either side, both the elevator and the stabilizer side. And then I put a little super glue on there, and then just match this piece of the elevator up, and then just sort of by eye made sure that it looked like the other one. Just stick it on there, line it up very carefully, and because you've sanded the angle, it should work out pretty well. It should end up being just what you want. So just kind of checking, making sure it's good, making sure they're kind of the same, and that's good. Now, this thing again, you can see that's terrible. That hole isn't lining up. That's me trying to give you a thumbs down. So here I am trying to test fit this thing, and I stick it in, goes through, but remember, these are just paper sides. This isn't even balsa sides, so this to me is kind of dopey because there's no structure to this, so I'm kind of dubious of this. So now I go to put this piece in, and what I notice immediately is something that's depressing. Look at how far off that is. Said a few choice words to the galaxy. And when you have the wire in there, you see it kind of twangs. It sort of unless it's absolutely perfect and you have everything absolutely divinely intervened, So what I did was I just went ahead, cut off that piece of wire at the nub, so that would sort of place one side, but not really be important. Not really be important for anything. Put glue on there, just did a butt join right up to the edge, and I decided I'll just butt join these things and then use the wire, the struts that go underneath, like they really are used. I butt joined the other side on. This is just paper to paper, and left it. And after a while, all I did was measure and cut some wires. So there they are, looking really good, looking straight, no worries. And what I've done is I've put the first of two sets of wires on there. You see they're just with super glue and they're wires. You can see the damaged part of the elevator or the stabilizer down there where I didn't do a good job. My wire poked through the paper. It was a mess. So just putting these wires in, these struts in, these struts work like they're supposed to. They support the stabilizer. So there's another pair that goes behind or goes right along the edge of the elevator there. So I just measure with my little dividers, make a little line, cut it off with my clippers, and then cut another one exactly the same, because I looked and it turned out they both were just fine. So you just eyeball that, make sure it's where the line is, and you hold on to these when you clip them, by the way, because they fly all over the place. I've hit my wife and son several times. Then I line them up together. You want to get them exactly the same. You don't have to measure anymore. You just put them together and then squish them down onto the workbench, and now, as long as you hold it, you know that it's perfectly the same size. So just butt the cutter up to that ridge and go ahead and cut. And now you end up with two ready to go struts. So a little super glue, and there are little holes that are positioned on the elevator and on the fuselage side, little areas that are perfectly done in the model, look really good. And there are shibelows. Again, this is fine. I'm trying to explain to you here that, look, it's strong. It's not going anywhere. It's straight. It's fine. It's just not as designed, and I think had I been more careful, I would have been able to use it. But this worked. I would just butt join if I was you.